Said it don't matter how many gold records you've got. Records is business. Stage is soul.
What did you take from that? I won't get into how much your music means and how nice it is to see you, but thanks for being here. How are you feeling?
I feel great. I really do. I feel really, really good. And I'm so pleased to be anywhere, quite frankly. This has been a really kind of overwhelming, I guess, what has it been now? 4 to 6 weeks?
Yeah.
It's kind of been a bit of a whirlwind. Who does this? Like, who does this, really? Seriously. Can we be honest? Who does this?
Who does what? Takes 20 years off?
Yeah. I mean, who does this? I've certainly never encountered it. I've encountered people who have taken, a year here, a couple of years there. But it has been one of the most fun and one of the most gratifying things I have ever done. And I'm so glad I did it. It's been so much fun.
Was there a time you didn't think it would happen?
Oh, of course. Yeah, 100%. We came off the road in 2002.
Wow.
It was the touring cycle for my third album. Yeah, my third album, Everybody's Got a Story. And I fired my manager, and it triggered this sort of decade and a half of just legal back and forth that went on and on and on, and it became this sort of chronic distraction. And I was always writing and recording. One of the big lessons of all of this for me personally was that I never really thought of myself as a creative person. It's a real big, heavy kind of term. And I always kind of thought that I was someone who, had some talent and certainly had been incredibly fortunate, but had sort of, and had been fortunate enough to follow a dream.
Yeah.
But I never thought of myself as someone with a creative hunger who woke up every day, with an itch to scratch. But this experience taught me that I am a creative person and that creativity manifests itself in a lot of different ways and that's what that means.
Right. You were kind of home. You were kind of handcuffed in some ways.
I was, yeah.
You weren't we don't have to get into the details of this thing, but my understanding is, even just from, I can infer that you probably weren't allowed to record or you weren't allowed to perform. Or they would be complicated if you did.
Yeah. It wasn't, I wasn't, handcuffed is maybe too strong of a term, but what it was that it was a chronic distraction that bled over into every aspect of my professional life.
Yeah.
And it was clear to me that anything new was going to get sucked into this sort of vortex of chaos.
Oh.
And nobody wants that. Nobody
Yeah.
wants this kind of anvil hanging over them all the time. And it just became one of those things that he wouldn't capitulate and I wouldn't capitulate, and we sort of we would get to like another plateau where you would think like, oh, maybe we're getting close to the end. And as it dragged on and on and on, there was considerable question in my own mind about whether or not I even wanted to continue, because a lot of things happen. First of all, you get sucked into your regular life. You get a regular life, which is something that I didn't really have.
And I guess you did well enough that you didn't have to work.
I was really lucky.
Yeah.
I'm also somebody who's not, I'm not like living an extraordinarily lavish, ridiculous lifestyle.
Yes.
So, I'm very fortunate, and I had a really good support system.
Yeah.
But that was one of the things, too, that was one of the sort of life skills that I think a lot of people learn as they naturally transition into adulthood out of necessity. You get your first job, you get your first place, you learn how to pay your own bills, you learn how to, overcome adversity, the natural adversity that life throws at you. Those things you miss when you do this job, particularly when you're successful young, because there's a natural infrastructure that springs up out of necessity around you.
Yeah.
Right? So you have people to do stuff for you.
Yeah, you don't learn those skills. You don't learn
right.
budgeting. You don't learn emotional resilience.
That's right.
You don't learn. So you're home, and this happens. This thing happens, and you're home, and you start going like, all right, well, I have a creative itch. It's there. It's good to know, and maybe I kind of miss it.
Yeah, I mean, my feeling was that, let me get up every day and do this and treat this as a job and do it, because it's something that I enjoy and it's something that I feel compelled to do. I don't know where this is going. I don't know if this is going to be something, but let me do it.
Okay.
And let me do it in a way that is satisfying to me. What ended up happening was that about halfway through, I would say a little more than halfway through, in 2017, we did a string of gigs that were mostly in Ontario, but there were a couple of gigs out west.
I remember hearing about it.
Yeah.
I remember hearing,
yeah.
Hey, Amanda Marshall's doing stuff. I remember that.
She's doing stuff. She's doing stuff again. Yeah, and we, it kind of took a lot of arm twisting for me to do it. My agent called and was like, listen, I've got these dates. It's a very kind of low stakes situation. There are festival shows and they're outdoors. It's summertime, which I love, and which I think he knew would appeal to me, and said, why don't you do them and just have some fun and just see if there's a demand first of all, and see if you still want to do this. You're young and you don't really need to retire, but if you want to keep going. He knew that I was kind of like sort of working on something.
And you had gotten clear of the...
At that point, yeah, I was sort of clear of it.
Yeah.
And so we went out and we did the shows. We had so much fun. And it was one of those scenarios where at the end of the summer, everyone in the organization, the band, everybody, we were all like, oh, this is so much fun. I wish this was the start of something.
How did the first one feel?
The first one was great. For me, I don't get real like nervous, or I don't have that.
Sure, but was there a feeling of, I bet you walked out on stage and people went crazy?
Yeah, it was pretty small. So, but people were like, yeah.
That must have felt something. Oh my God, they remembered me, that kind of thing,
Yeah. Yep. It was very, very, the thing that is most gratifying to me is I'm always surprised, first of all, to see who's in the audience. The first show, the thing that surprised me the most was that there were people who drove up from other places. There were a couple from Atlanta. There were like people from places that I wasn't expecting. And I thought, these songs are meaningful outside of the immediate circle that I might, consider. And then to watch the audience really re-embrace the songs fervently, like really, really passionately, was amazing to me.
Did you remember your own lyrics?
Yes, I did remember my own lyrics, but that's a good question because I'm currently in rehearsal for the tour, and one of the funny things that we have going on now is everybody trying to remember lyrics, and I'm the worst.
Yeah, because I'm thinking, like, do you have to Google Amanda Marshall Dark Horse lyrics like I do, and do you have to do that?
Not for a song like Dark Horse, but there's a song in the set called If I Didn't Have You, and the first time we rehearsed it, for some reason I have a brain block on the third verse, so our guitar player had it, on his phone and was like holding it up and showing me.
And then the tour goes well, and you start thinking, maybe I'll put out a record.
Yeah, well, the tour went well, and then that was really kind of the kick that I needed. And I went home and I thought, you know what? First of all, I went back and listened to what we had recorded, and it was clear to me that it was something. It was clear to me that it was a record. And it wasn't done, but it was something. And so we set about finishing it, and that took, I don't know, maybe another 24 months.
And then the pandemic happened.
And then the pandemic hit. We finished it just as the pandemic hit.
And now, how are you feeling?
Honestly, I was saying to somebody today that I came into this with no expectations. I really didn't. I am so pleased to have made a record that I love, and it really was so satisfying to me. And people always say that, like, oh, I made a record that I love, and I don't really care what this is the first time for me that is 100% true. I had no expectation. I didn't know what anybody else was going to think about it, but I thought, if nobody hears this, that's fine. If people hear it and they embrace it, that's great too. My main goal was to just get out and sort of reconnect with the audience and give it an opportunity. And that's what brought us here.
Well, let's listen to what brought us here. Take a listen to this.
I hope she cheats on you with a basketball player. Hope that she Kim Kardashian the way up. Don't know the difference between a touchdown and a layup. Got you on Viagra so you could stay up. I may sound bitter, I'm a little bitter, just a little bitter. Because you were with her, I'm in Salt Lake City, up on out the picture. Remember how it was when I was with you, baby.
I feel like when that song came out, it was like the bat signal for every Canadian who knows who Rick the Temp is. I feel like
my people.
We were like, huh? What's that? I haven't heard that voice in a while. It was like in the beginning of Star Wars, where they're like, oh, that's a name I haven't heard.
We need like a silhouette with hair on it, just up in the sky. Yeah.
That is Amanda Marshall, and that was the first Amanda Marshall single in 20 years. I Hope She Cheats. A cover, right?
It's a cover of a song that was co-written by Marsha Ambrosius, who was one half of Floetry, who were fierce in the early aughts. They were an R&B duo. It was her and a partner out of the UK. And I knew who they were. I wasn't like I wasn't deep on their catalog or anything. But Marcia put this song out, I think in 2010 or 2011 on a solo record, and I missed it. I didn't hear it. But then I was shopping one day. Must have been like it was the last song added to the record. So it must have been like 2018, 2019. And I was shopping and I heard it and I literally stopped dead. And you know all those like apps that people have on their phones, Shazam.
Yeah.
I don't have any of those.
Okay.
So I'm like asking people, I'm like, do you know who this is? No, nobody knew.
Right.
So I went home and Googled it.
What you remembered, I guess.
What I remembered.
Yeah.
Well, that lyric was so distinctive. I hope she cheats on you with a basketball player. It was so clever and so badass, and it made me laugh. And it was so distinctive that I didn't have any trouble finding it. And I wrote this arrangement. The arrangement is very different than her original arrangement.
Yeah.
She's a very straight up R&B kind of hip hop artist. And yeah, I wrote the arrangement that night. And, you know, sometimes as a singer, you hear something that you kind of feel this like immediate ownership over.
Yeah.
And I heard this song just spoke to me, and it made me kind of reevaluate my own work on the rest of the record, which is why I wanted it to be the first single, because it really did set the tone for the rest of the record.
Well, I don't know that much about you. Like your dad's Canadian, your mom's from Trinidad, right?
That's right.
What kind of music were you listening to growing up?
Everything.
What was going on in the house?
My parents were incredibly, they're not musical themselves, but they were so careful to make sure, I'm an only child, and they were so careful to make sure that I had as expansive a musical education as possible. I took classes at the Royal Conservatory here in Toronto as a young kid to learn how to like read music, which, I mean, I'm still like, but, you know, piano lessons and all that stuff. But they had a really, really wide record collection. My dad was a real fan of just sort of the kind of music he grew up listening to, Beach Boys, I'm trying to think.
Beatles and that kind of
stuff. Beatles, Rolling Stones, all that
yeah.
stuff. And my mom was a big jazz fan, so she had all kinds of like Ella Fitzgerald, and she was a big Barbra Streisand fan.
Oh, cool.
A big musicals fan.
Oh, right on, yeah.
So it was a whole lot of like diversity in their record collection. And I would go through and kind of, these were the days when you would pull records out and lay on the floor and read the liner notes. So they were really, and they were very generous with like, listen to our records and, pick out the stuff that you like and take it to your room. I had a record player in my room from the time I was probably 5-6 years old, like one of those little, like the suitcase record players.
Yeah.
And I would take their records and I would listen to their records endlessly.
Did you know you could sing then? Did people know you could sing? Yeah.
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 I mean, from the time I was, from the time I was in nursery school. And it's one of those things that when you do something and adults notice and they give you attention, positive attention, you do it more.
Was it always that voice, the one you have? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think it was some version of it. I mean, I wasn't one of those kids who was, you see those kids on like talent shows who are sort of, they're like mini adults. I wasn't one of those. Or they're singing like runs and stuff like that. I wasn't one of those. But it developed over time. But I think I had a very similar tone, probably.
Let's skip ahead a little bit. So there's some stops and starts kind of early in your career in the 90s. Mm-hmm. You start to get the ball rolling, and then a lot of people heard you for the first time with this.
Old man lying by the side of the road with the lorries rolling by. Blue moon sinking with the weight of the load and the buildings scrape the sky. Cold wind ripping down the alley.
That is Amanda Marshall with, you want to say what it is?
Don't Let It Bring You Down. That's a Neil Young song.
That's a Neil Young song.
I love that song, and I love that version of that song. Man.
Me too.
Yeah. I'm really proud of that because I arranged it. I wrote that arrangement of that song, and it was such an instinctive thing. Like I felt all those pushes, and I remember it was the first time that I sort of assembled a group of musicians in the studio myself. I couldn't have been more than maybe 20, 21.
Yeah. And that's big for that. So stuff happened after that, right?
Well, I was already signed when I did that. I was signed to Sony Canada. I signed a deal with Columbia Records out of New York when I was, I was young enough that my mom actually signed it. So I was probably maybe 17, 18. And then that deal fell apart because I didn't know what kind of record I wanted to make. I was singing in clubs, and I already had a manager, and I was gigging, but it wasn't really clear what kind of record I wanted to make and what kind of record they wanted me to make. And I didn't want to put out something that I didn't feel good about. And I think they sort of lost interest in me. So the thing sort of fell apart. And then I just kept playing. I kept gigging.
Yeah.
And then I got signed to Sony Canada. And I think that might have been the first thing.
That's right, it was.
It was part of a compilation.
Yeah, Borrowed Tunes, yeah. And then after that is when, I mean, everything kind of happens, right?
Yeah, and that's when, after that was when I went to LA and started working on my own record. Yeah.
I heard this story. I watched this clip of you to get ready for this interview.
Right.
It was you on Rosie O'Donnell, right?
Right.
And I remember Rosie O'Donnell had a talk show, and it was like a big after-school talk show when I was growing up. And I was looking at it, and I was like, oh, I guess Amanda Marshall, she was big and famous, and she got to go on Rosie O'Donnell's show. I'm going to watch it. And it's not that. It's Rosie O'Donnell sitting there and being like, so Elton John told me about you and told me I should have you on the show and found Dark Horse or something like that. But I couldn't get the story. Can you tell it to me?
So Elton John.
You had the record already done.
The record was done. The record was out. And Birmingham was doing really, really well. It was the #1 ad at US Radio. And we were starting to get some smoke in the United States. I think we were on tour. I can't remember who we were on tour with. We might have been on tour with John Mellencamp by then. But so Elton John goes on Rosie O'Donnell to promote his own thing. And Elton John, in those days, I don't know if they still do this, but there was New Release Tuesday. So every Tuesday, all the new releases came out.
Yeah, it's Friday now, right?
Is it Friday?
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, right.
So on Tuesdays, Elton John would go out famously and buy all the new releases and listen to them. And my record, I guess, was one of the new releases that he bought. And he gets to Dark Horse, and he felt very strongly about this song. He loved the song, and sort of sought me out. And so he subsequently goes on Rosie O'Donnell, and she talks to him about this phenomenon, the fact that he goes out and he buys all these new releases. What are you listening to? He mentions the song, and he mentions me. And his push was to get Sony to release it as a single, because at that point it wasn't scheduled for release as a single in the United States because they were working Birmingham. We were booked on Rosie's show already when Elton went on. I don't know if he knew that or not, but we were booked, I think, for like sometime in the 2 weeks following.
Okay.
So he goes on and he talks about me, and everybody loses their mind, and my mom calls me. And in those days, there was no social media. People barely had cell phones. So it was very like, Elton John, it was like a game of telephone. Like, Elton John talked about you on the TV. Elton John talked about her on the TV.
And about a song that wasn't the single.
So it was great. It was very exciting. And I was like, well, that's fantastic. That's great. People will pay attention, and maybe, I don't know, will happen, but that's very exciting. Certainly, I was a huge Elton John fan. It was very flattering. I was very, very excited. We were going to be on the show. And then in the intervening 2 weeks, we had a gig in Whistler, BC. Mm-hmm. So I'm sitting in a hotel restaurant in Whistler one day after sound check, and the maitre d' comes running into the restaurant up to the table and says, Ms. Marshall, there's a phone call for you. And he's gray, and sweating. And I thought, someone is dead. and so I get up and I go with him to the booth, the maitre d' booth, and it's Elton John on the phone.
Wow.
For me.
Wow.
To tell me that I just wanted to give you a heads up. I don't know if you've heard or not, but I mentioned you on American television, and I really want to hammer home for you what a great song this is. And David Furnish, his husband, is from Toronto. We chatted about Toronto, and he said, I want you to know this is the heartbeat of your record, which to me was the most flattering thing, because it was one of the songs that I wrote on the record out of a bunch of songs that there were other songs that I hadn't written. And he said, this is the heartbeat of your record, and you got to push them to put this out as a single. I know this is the #1 single in America. And, it was extremely flattering. It was just a great, I wasn't overwhelmed by it in the sense that, I wasn't completely starstruck. I was stunned, but I wasn't sort of starstruck, and I didn't have any illusions that we were going to go on to be best friends or anything. It just became this thing. And he's done this for other people. He's talked about other people and other new releases. Yeah. I think I just happened to be the first, and certainly it was incredibly classy of him to pick up the phone.
Did you have to? Can we play the song? Just play a little bit of the song. I don't know if I'm ever going to get to talk to you. It's an unbelievable song.
Well, thank you.
It's an unbelievable song.
It's a
It
good
remains. And when as we were having you on the show, our office people were just singing Dark Horse. So hold on, do you go to the label and go, "Hey, Elton John told me to release a single," and they say okay?
Yeah, well, it was like Elton John thinks we should release this as a single, and they were sort of like, "That's nice," you know.
What does he know?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
and because they were labels have a tendency, particularly in those days, to be very kind of one-directional, kind of myopic, and they were working Birmingham, and that's where we were. Eventually. I can't even remember if it came out as a single in the U.S., honestly. I think it might have come out maybe as like a fourth or fifth single down the road, but it was, it did not get the Elton push that I think Elton was hoping for.
What were those moments like for you when everything got really, really big? How do you reflect on it?
I mean, the thing is, I was not really aware. I remember a record guy said to me once, this guy from Sony, we were in the middle of doing something, and I can't remember what it was. It might have been a record signing, a CD signing or something. And he looked at me and said, "You have no idea what's going on, do you?" And I said, "Nope. And I'm happy to keep it that way." I woke up every day. I was incredibly grateful because I was a kid who wanted to see the world. I really wanted to travel. The most meaningful moments to me were when we got to go to Japan or when we got to go to Australia, when I was lying at the base of the Eiffel Tower and I got to call my mom. That stuff to me was gold. The shows, obviously, gold, incredibly important. But all the other stuff, the business, the numbers, all that stuff, it wasn't something that really penetrated me. When I was maybe, 19 or 20. It was before the record came out. It might have been around the time that Neil Young song came out. I did a gig at the House of Blues in Los Angeles. And Sam Moore of Sam and Dave was on this gig.
Cool.
Hold on, I'm coming. I'm a soul man. And I was talking with him after the show. I was just fascinated because I love stories. I want to hear people's stories.
Yeah.
I want to hear your war stories.
Yeah.
And I said, "Mr. Moore, do you have any advice for me? I'm just getting ready to make my record. I'm so excited." I said, "Do you have any advice for me?" And he said, "First of all, you sing the melody, and I like that." He said, "You're not singing all these crazy, weird runs like these kids today." He said, "You're singing the melody, and I like that." He said, "And you're telling stories, and that's important." He said, "But let me tell you something. Records is business. Stage is soul."
Records is business, stage is soul.
Records is business. He said, "It don't matter how many gold records you've got. Records is business. Stage is soul."
What did you take from that?
That when you get on stage, none of that other stuff matters. When you get on stage, you got to do exactly what we do, which is you hold hands with the people around you and we all jump off this thing together, right? Music is a physical expression of an emotional experience. And that is what is that's what distinguishes it probably from almost every other art form, maybe other than dance, right?
Yeah.
It is the only opportunity that we have as human beings to stand together and bond over this thing that it's not language and it's not strictly a visual thing.
Yeah.
It's this auditory experience that we all have together, right? That struck me in my heart. It went right to my core and I've never forgotten it. So all this other stuff, records is business. Like, that's just business, right? That's just numbers. That's accounting. That's whatever.
I thought he was going to say, "Don't work with Dave." Whatever you do. Don't work with Dave.
No children, no animals, no Dave.
No Dave. Speaking of records as business, there's something I was curious about, and I haven't seen you talk about. I don't want to say I've never heard you talk about it because I'll get an email being like, "Actually, I talked to her about it for Chat Lane in 1996." But I haven't seen you talk about it. On Tuesday's Child, you sang about being mixed race.
Yep.
In your song Shades of Grey. What was it? When my grandmother held me for.
When my grandmother held me for the very first time, she thanked God I looked like my daddy. Yep.
I've never really heard you talk about that. And record industry wise, speaking of records as business, that's an industry that likes to put you in a box, often based on race, especially in those days.
Sure.
Did you come up on any of that?
Sure. But, it would be foolish of me to sit here and pretend that, like, if I looked like Alicia Keys, we'd be having a different conversation, right?
Yeah.
So The best way I can describe this, I'll tell you a funny story, and this is the best description I can give you. So in 1990, I don't know, it must have been 98, 99, we're on tour in Europe. We're opening for Simply Red. Remember Simply Red?
Oh, yeah. What was their song?
Holding back the years.
I just wanted you to sing it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we're having a blast with Simply Red. Towards the end of that tour, my manager calls me and says, we have a chance for you to open for Whitney Houston. She's coming to Europe. She was in the middle of the My Love Is Your Love tour, which was like sort of the last really big successful tour that she did. And I was, when I tell you, a dyed-in-the-wool Whitney Houston fan. She was the only singer whose posters were all over my bedroom walls when I was a kid. Her first record came out when I think I was like 11 or 12.
Yeah.
And I worshipped Whitney Houston. And Whitney was obviously somebody whose talent, transcended race and gender. It didn't matter what kind of music you liked. You knew that her talent was incomparable. So I'm like, listen, I don't care what you have to do or who you have to do it to, get me on this tour.
Yeah.
So we get the tour. I am vibrating with excitement. So we have about a week in between the end of the Simply Red tour and the beginning of the Whitney Houston tour. So it didn't make sense for us to come all the way back and then go all the way back to Europe. So we just stayed. So on one of the nights in between, there's a big industry function, a big dinner, label dinner. And it's me and two other now incredibly famous, I'm not going to tell you who they were, but very, very famous, you would recognize them, American musical artists.
Sam and Dave.
Yeah, Sam and Dave. And one of them is African-American and the other one is not.
Okay.
So we finish the dinner and people are like milling about, just chatting, smoking or having whatever. And I am talking to one of the label executives, and he says to me, American label executives, and he says to me, what are you doing next? So I said, oh my God, we're going on tour with Whitney Houston. I can't believe it. And he kind of says, oh, really? Whitney, really? He says, are you sure that's the right place for you? And I'm like, yeah, I'm very sure it's the right place for me.
Yeah.
He said, really, Amanda, because that audience, they really tend to prefer their own. And at the time, it didn't strike me as anything because I thought, oh, maybe he means like genre. Like maybe I'm a little more I'm in a different musical lane. So I didn't really think anything of it. But the kicker is, 5 minutes after that conversation, I go and I sit down at a table with the African-American of the two other musical artists. And this person says to me, what are you doing after this is all done? I said, I'm going on tour with Whitney Houston. And this person says, oh, you'll do great. Pretty little white girl like you, they're going to eat you right up. So all of this to illustrate that, I am in a very, unique lane. So any experience that I have had is, to me, illustrative of the fact that people really, people behave differently depending on who they think they're with.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons that I have not made this a huge issue in my life or career is because I've always sort of thought about it as being kind of a superpower. You get a tremendous amount of insight into people when they think they're in a room with everybody's just like them.
Yeah. Being white passing. If you're in a room with a bunch of people who are white, they're going to talk. They're going to talk to
That's
you like
right.
you're a white person. So you get to see how it.
And I have never, ever, ever once in my entire life had a black person express any surprise to me when they find out that I am, whatever we're calling it these days.
Yeah.
I have never once.
Yeah.
But every single white person I have ever met, just about, has expressed surprise, which to me is, that's interesting.
It is. It's. Thanks for talking to me about it.
Sure.
I've never really heard you talk about it too much in press or anything like that.
It's funny because very few people ask me about it.
I'm glad you like to talk about it.
Well, I don't mind.
I'm not looking forward to hearing from the Chatelaine magazine. On the music industry side, I mean, entering the music industry on a 20-year gap, it's a whole different ballgame. I mean, think about that. Last time you put out a record, it was CDs.
I know.
It was CDs only. It was.
I remember CD long boxes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was. Yeah, I have a couple of those.
Yeah.
It was music videos in much music on TV.
Yep.
I mean, it was a million different music magazines, a million. I mean, it's very, very different right now.
Yep.
How do you? You're almost like an alien who visits this other world, and I can say like, what was it? You know, what's it like now?
Like,
You know,
in the old days when you made music by lamplight.
not like that, but like you because you had a break.
Yeah.
You get to enter this world fresh from the old world.
Yeah.
What's that like?
I mean, in some ways it's really weird. But mostly it is, and I think this is probably a product of a couple of things: age, experience, and feeling like the whole thing is kind of low stakes. There isn't the kind of I don't feel any real pressure or attachment to the numbers or to learning about, like, I don't understand any of the certifications anymore. I don't know, with streaming, I don't understand what any of that means.
Gold is lower and all that stuff.
I don't get it,
yeah.
and quite frankly, I don't care.
Yeah.
I don't understand it.
Yeah.
You know, people tell me it's good, great. If people tell me it's not great, no, well, it's too bad. I don't get it. The main thing that I notice is this crushing, constant, 24/7 churn of, you got to create content. There has to be content. We have to create content. There has to be content. There has to be this online content. It's just this constant churn.
TikToks and
TikTok
Instagram and all that.
All that
Yeah,
stuff.
because in your day it was, you made a record and went on tour.
Yeah. You went on tour, and maybe you went on like Rosie, or you went on TV, or you came on a show like this,
Yeah.
right? So that is the main difference, and that's probably the biggest adjustment. But I like it. I like that. I actually really, it's not so much the churn, but I like it's a creative endeavor. So I like that part of it. I like the creating part of it.
Tell me this. Tell me we're not going to talk, and then 20 years are going to go by before.
You never know. I'm an elusive gal.
You're going to
No, I
make
don't
more
think so.
music, right?
Yeah, I still have lots of music in my back pocket that sort of didn't end up on this record. And I'm actually finding that it is like working a muscle. Like, the more you do it, the easier it is. And the more you do it, the more you want to do it. So
I can only imagine, and in all seriousness now, I can only imagine, like, I made jokes off the top, and they were real, about like people going like, you should have Amanda Marshall on and figure out where she is. And you should have Amanda Marshall on and ask what happened,
Right.
you know? Because it was almost like you were a dream. You know, you were this.
Was she really here?
Yeah, you were this dream. And man, in all seriousness, I bet you got a lot of that. I bet you got a lot of, where are you? Where did you go? At the grocery store, that kind of stuff. You know.
Not really. You know, one of the things that was that I've really enjoyed about this period of laying fallow, if you will, or lying fallow, is the anonymity. Nobody believes me, but I really slipped right back in to the water, like I was never here. And I don't get, because, like, I got all this headgear that is sort of naturally occurring. Without this and without all of this, I don't get a lot of,
Okay.
I really, really am able to be almost completely anonymous, which I love.
Yeah.
Like, I really, really love that,
Yeah.
because it enables you to interact with people in a way that you don't get to do otherwise, and you can live your life.
Yeah.
And I always tell people, anybody who tells you, any famous person who tells you, man, I can't get out of here without security, they're lying. You could do it if you want to. You really can. You can do it.
I hope that you feel the love that people feel for you now that you're back.
I really do. I really do. Honestly, I do. And I'm shocked. I keep saying it's sort of like slipping back into a warm bath, but you're shocked that the water is still warm. You're like, where is this warm water coming from? Yeah. And to know, somebody asked me the other day, well, does it bother you that, your audience is transitioning now and you're seeing people bringing their children to the shows? Are you kidding me? Like, who doesn't want to look out into the audience and see multi-generational families singing your material? That's why you make records, is because you're hoping they'll be timeless and meaningful to people over a long period of time. I don't think when I was first doing this, I don't think I really got that. Like, I don't think I really understood. People would say to you, oh, like, Dark Horse was our wedding song, and you think, oh, yeah, it's nice, that's great, I'm really happy for you. But it didn't really sink in,
That's a weird wedding song.
Yeah, well, I picked it at random, but you know what I mean. There were, like, people would come up to you and say, like, oh, that song is so meaningful to me, and I would think, that's amazing, but really? Like, it's just me, you know?
And now you're able to.
Now
feel
I'm
it.
sort of able to take it in. Yeah.
Nothing makes me happier than that because you really deserve it.
Oh, thank you.
And thank you so much for coming in and talking to me.
Thank you for having me.
This has been a joy for me.
Oh, thanks. My pleasure, really.